Sanbatskano. I'm Peter Bittner. You're watching Talk With Me. Sanbatskano. Hello, and welcome to Talk With Me. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. Today's guest is Mark Tasse, the Executive Director of People in Need, an international NGO. Mark Tasse, originally from Canada, is the Executive Director of People in Need, an international NGO based in Czechia. Before his role at People in Need, Mark was the Resident Director of the American Center for Mongolian Studies for 5 years. Mark has a dual master's in International Business Administration and Global Management and Business Development. Mark has over 25 years of experience managing organizations in the private and nonprofit sectors. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, for those who aren't familiar, could you give us a little overview of People in Need? I understand it operates in about 30 countries. It's based in Czechia, but tell us a little bit about its history in Mongolia here.
Okay. So People in Need is an international NGO, started, as you said, from a group based out of Prague. It's a spin-off of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and what they did is starting to work with social issues within the Czech Republic, developed some competencies and have expanded that to develop expertise in different parts of the world. So we're involved with the conflicts in Ukraine, we're involved in Syria and Afghanistan, Southeast Asia, and then we started in Mongolia roughly about 10 years ago.
Wow.
So the main focus here in Mongolia we've been looking at has been working with ZUD responses. That's what brought us here in 2009, was the big ZUD of 2009, 2010. And that's been constantly one of the main themes, is working with that resilience, that emergency response component as we go through. We were involved in responses for the last couple of winters here as we're going through. And that's been one of the starting points for pretty much all of the People in Need missions, is coming into areas of difficulty, helping with the emergencies that's coming in, and then staying afterwards for the recovery and redevelopment as we go.
It sounds like humanitarian efforts are the core of mission here then, at least from a historical standpoint. Yeah, so it's all the DR is one of the important parts of what we're doing here in Mongolia, building that resilience and capacity. DR?
Disaster risk reduction.
Okay.
So disaster risk reduction is one of the important things of what we're doing here. A lot of our programs are geared around that capacity building here within Mongolia. So we work with National Emergency Agency here in Mongolia, NEMA, on emergency response, on ZUD preparedness, and a lot of the current and future programs are developed on building that capacity within the countryside, within the herders, within the SUMs and the IMAGs to better prepare and deal with not only winter emergencies, but also earthquakes, floods, pandemics that may come through into Mongolia, and work with that overall emergency response component.
Wow. So it sounds like you have a current project in Dornod and Sukbatar then, involving this ZUD relief or winter herder resilience. Could you tell us a little bit about that and when it started?
So the LTT4R is a program funded by the European Community and by ECHO. And what their program is focusing on is building that resilience. So training herders on an international standards called LEGS, which is on how to better prepare for different types of slow onset disasters, which is what a ZUD is. So ZUDs, droughts, famines, those kinds of things. And training ideally the herders, the local officials on how to anticipate and how to prepare for those events that go through. So we've been doing in Dornod and Sukbatar, and in partnership with Mercy Corps in Arhangai and Norhangai. So we're dealing in 4 provinces. One of the interesting innovations in this project is we've incorporated an SMS messaging system, so which is now going to be available across Mongolia. So in the wintertime, we give weather notifications on emergencies. We give information about pasturage areas of how much pasture is available, movements and recommendations on emergency responses or availabilities that are there. And that will be delivered through text messages across Mongolia. So that even the herders can stand on top of the mountain, throw their phone up in the air to get an SMS message, and when it comes back down, there'll be those informations that they're using to planning herd movements, planning otter, where they're going to move, to which regions, and what kind of assistance is available for them.
That's amazing. So who are you working with to make those suggestions and recommendations for herders about where they should move and when, and the types of alerts?
So we don't make the recommendations. So the national NEMA here in Mongolia is responsible for that. What we're doing is developing the capacity and infrastructure. So the computer software, the servers to be able to deliver the SMS messages is what we focus on. And then the training to SUM officials, IMAG officials, and then obviously NEMA and government officials here on how these systems integrate together and work. And then going down to how do they train the herders on what to do with this information, how to work with it, and how to make it more available.
Wow. And so when did this project begin, and how long will it continue for?
So the project began a little over a year ago. It's officially ending in December of this year for this phase, and then we're working in discussions with ECHO, which is a European donor, on seeing if we can work on a phase 2. PIN has had a strong commitment to continuing with this, so we have Laurel Hansen, who was brought in as a DRR specialist, and she's now head of programs here in Mongolia. And she'll be staying on. We have one of our Mongolian colleagues, Ganchmeg, who is now in Budapest for 2 weeks training on the global emergency response systems, that she'll be coming back, and they're going to be becoming permanent staff. So even though we may not necessarily have the continuation of that project, this is something that we are continuing on with this resilience and preparedness.
Fantastic. How big is your staff, permanent staff?
So we've got 15 people full-time working in Mongolia, and it fluctuates up and down up to about 25, depending on the season and what's happening. So we're on the smaller missions for people in need. We look at some of our larger missions like Ukraine and Syria. We got 300 to 500 people working on some of those missions as full-time staff. But it's good. It's a decent size for operations in Mongolia, and it keeps us busy.
That's good. That's good. What other projects are keeping you busy at the moment?
So basically the core areas that we're looking at in Mongolia is, as we said, emergency response, this disaster risk reduction that we're focusing on. The other area we're focusing on is urban issues, and we've just started that recently. So we've got 2 urban projects we're working on, both of them also funded by the European Commission, by the European Union. One of them is our Right to Breathe project, which is focusing on air quality and air pollution issues within Mongolia, not focusing directly on interventions, but we're focusing on coordination. So we're looking at Mongolian NGOs, Mongolian agencies that are all addressing the air pollution issue within Mongolia, and focusing on how can they better coordinate their efforts. So it's consolidation, it's information sharing, it's verification to make sure that the information, the data that government, that media, the different organizations are sharing with the people is accurate, it's scientifically proven. So eliminate some of the myths and mythologies that are floating out there. But also focusing on messaging, so a little bit on how to approach and deliver these messages to people. How to approach government and officials who are making commitments to fix this issue. So how do you hold them accountable for the decisions and things that are happening? But also getting the best practices, getting it down to the people living in the communities, in the GAIR districts and in the city, of what are ways that they can, and what are the more effective ways of reducing the impacts of air pollution. What are things that they can do now that will help their families stay healthier, stay better, and that they can start working towards improving the air quality within the city. So it's more of a knowledge information sharing project. The other project we're working with, which is in partnership with JEDES, a French NGO, is focusing on the other side. So we're focusing on construction and construction standards in the GAIR districts. So there was GAIR stove projects been doing, and there's some other variations of this that are coming on. We're looking now more at the buildings themselves within the GAIR district. So if you can make the buildings more energy efficient, you can make them warmer in the wintertime, then it requires less coal to burn, reduces the amount of pollution that's being generated, or makes it more cost effective to use alternative heating options like electric or other things. So this project focuses on that, on new designs and new blueprints for homes within the GAIR districts, their permanent homes, looking also at how to retrofit existing buildings to make them more energy efficient and make more warmer so that they're better equipped for the winter. And then looking at how do we make that happen. So we're looking at the supply chain. So we're looking at the construction workers, construction companies, the supply of materials that are available. How can we make sure that they're affordable, they're locally sourced, and if possible, Mongolian-based products. So there's product prior that we worked with focusing on sheep wool insulation. So how can we incorporate that more largely into the Mongolian construction landscape as an eco-friendly, locally sourced type of material that's available. So that's the second project is focusing on, is dealing with that urban issue of making the houses warmer, safer, better.
Right, so both of those projects are dealing with air pollution in UB here, correct?
So they're primarily focused with air pollution in UB, but we're also piloting it out with some of the other cities in the countryside. So the Right to Breed project, we also have a branch project we're running in Tsitsaleg in Arhangay province.
Got it.
They have a slightly similar air pollution problem for slightly different reasons. Geography is one of the main issues that they're looking at. So we're trying to see is some of the things we're looking at recommending in UB, does it actually apply in other areas? So we can start getting that comparison of how widespread is the issue across Mongolia.
So you've lived here for how many winters?
This is finished my 6th winter here in Mongolia.
Your 6th winter?
Yeah.
Wow, so you're pretty experienced when it comes to the first-hand kind of impact of air pollution. How do you get through the winter here?
So a lot of the stuff, which some of the things that we'll be recommending through the program, mask use and extensive mask use throughout the winter, especially when you're in the city. We've got filters within the office and as well as home, so we're doing internal infiltration as we go through. Get out of the city on the weekends, get out to get a chance to get some clean air and do some things as you go through. So a lot of the typical things that were happening. Some of the things that we're also looking at is your diet, your health, so antioxidants to help your body clean, adequate rest as you're going through, different things like that. So there's some things that you need to do as an individual to survive and push through. So we're not only making recommendations, but we're getting our team and our staff to live them as well. That's
good. That sounds important. Talk the talk, walk the walk.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. And what other ongoing programs do you have? How many major projects do you have at the office?
So we have 5 projects. We talked about 3. We talked about the resilience project, the LTT4R in countryside. We've talked about the 2 air pollution Gare district development projects currently. We also have another project in Arhangay and Urhangay focusing on local economic development. So that's focusing on co-ops, small businesses, or unorganized business groups, working on business planning, access to funding, governance, organizational structure, and focusing with them on how can they develop a stronger local economy, and focusing more on getting some income coming from that. So we're looking at agricultural co-ops, we're looking at herding co-ops as we're going through, manufacturing co-ops, and production co-ops as we're going through. And so the idea there is how can they leverage as individuals and as herders. There's not a lot of capital, not a lot available to them as an individual, so how can they come together, share resources, share access, share expenses, and then from there also share the profits, increasing their availability to market. So stuff on marketing, on advertising, labeling for their products as we're going through. So we work with that on very much a local, rural level, and we also work with the SUMs around the SUM development funds on how to look at more effective ways of expanding and developing those projects, as well as within the IMAGs, the IMAG governments, of what are their development plans, what do they want to do, and how can we look at incorporating different components into that area. So that's an ongoing project, and that'll be going on until next spring. That's been going on for the last 3 years.
Okay.
As we're going through. And then the final project is a smaller project.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about that one. So what types of cooperatives are you working with? Are you helping organize them, or are you advising pre-existing cooperatives? What's the strategy? So
we work with existing cooperatives. So there's a very specific structure that was created in 2012 here in Mongolia for definition of a co-op. So we work within that definition as we go. And the focus there is, we're focused primarily with the smaller, the less successful co-ops as they're going through. So we're on how to become more efficient, how to become more profitable as they go through. So a lot of that has been focusing on access to funding. So one of the issues with co-ops, because of the way the structure is, it's difficult for them to get commercial funding from banks or other areas. And they don't necessarily fall into the regular fundings for some of the other grants that are available for other organizations. So we work with them on how to create business plans, how to structure and show what they actually do, what they offer, and go through. So we have agricultural co-ops that are focusing on organizing their products, diversifying their products. So instead of just doing potatoes and carrots and onions, looking at parsnips, looking at other types of things that can be brought to market locally and possibly into the city. Yak wool is one of the yak wool co-ops that we've worked with on developing a new industry that seems to be growing that's of interest. So the yak wool co-ops, sheep wool co-ops are there, tanneries that we're looking at. So looking at the herding co-ops that are gathering sheep wool, putting them in touch with the rug weaving co-ops so that there's a supply chain building that happens as we go through. So those are the types of things that we're looking at within the region. So it's building those linkages between the different organizations. So, yeah.
It seems like a lot of the work of PIN here is developing networks and facilitating communication between different organizations and advising. Is that true?
So the main philosophy, especially in Mongolia, but internationally for PIN, is we're not here to do the work. We're here to develop the capacity for the local organizations to do the work. So we always work through local CSOs, local community support organizations. And we train them in their capacity to actually go out. So for example, in the co-op program in Arhangai, we're not going out and doing the training or doing the work. What we do is we bring local organizations, local agencies, and local consultants. And we train their ability to then go off and support them to go out and provide this information to the local co-ops. So ideally, at the end of the projects, when we're done, the local organizations have the capacity to continue on. They know how to get access to future funding. They have an existing track record that they can now use for working and applying for other programs or other opportunities to keep developing their communities. So the focus is very much on building the capacity internally within Mongolia to manage Mongolia's problems, rather than having us as a foreign agency come in and prescribe what the recommendations, what they need to do.
Sure. That makes sense. So what's the final project? Have we gotten through
So the last one we're doing is a small one. It's a cooperative agreement between Mongolian University, University of Life Science, and Czech National University of Life Science. This is sponsored by the Czech government. And it's focusing on wildlife herder interaction and more of the impacts of climate on wildlife and how that's impacting also sort of the Mongolian pasture land, the herds, the potential of disease and other things that are transmitting between wildlife and domesticated animals. So we have faculty from Prague that'll be coming this summer and running a field school. We have faculty from the Mongolian University that'll be going to Prague for 4 weeks of training and seeing how they're doing these programs. So this has been going on for a while. This is the second year of this project. Prior, we did 2 years with MUST on actually architecture and Gare district building and energy efficiency, and then we'll be looking at continuing that next year. We're not quite sure yet what area we're going to be focusing on.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Wow, you have a lot of irons in the fire then.
We do. So we tend to focus on different areas. We focus on what local needs are, but the main focus is we're looking at is resilience, so disaster risk reduction, focusing on education as we go through, and then focusing on local economy. So those are the main areas we concentrate on.
Fantastic. So you've been here for 6 years, is that correct? And your previous role was as resident director of the American Center for Mongolian Studies. So how did that experience professionally, personally inform your work at PIN now?
So focus with the American Center for Mongolian Studies for ACMS was basically research. And it was cooperative academic research between researchers coming to Mongolia, building relationships with universities here in Mongolian academics. So for me, the biggest advantage, of course, is I got this broad spectrum of information and knowledge about what exactly is happening. So talking from archaeologists and archaeology in Mongolia to climate specialists to social scientists that were coming in to medical researchers that were coming and looking at things like nutrition, like psychiatric health, and sitting down and having conversations with them, talking about their research, about their plans and how they're looking at doing this. So it gave me a very broad spectrum of what's happening within Mongolia, what are some of the issues, and what are some of the opportunities that we come through. So the nice thing is taking that information, rolling it into PIN, is there's a deeper understanding and there's pre-existing connections and knowledge that I can use to bring into our projects and into our areas. So if we need, like I said, an expert in climate or resilience as we're going through, there are several people that I know that are here and internationally that have that expertise that we can tie into to move around. So that was very helpful, and I think that's probably the biggest benefit from that.
No doubt. It seems like you're pulling from that network and that experience. What was some of the, I guess, most interesting challenges you faced and overcame at ACMS as director there?
The biggest thing was the coordination. Universities tend to be, in many ways, insular, and they don't tend to play well with each other. And we would see that not only domestically, but also from our international partners. So we worked with 37 universities in US, Canada, Europe, and different countries as we went through. So the biggest thing was getting them to share their knowledge, share their information, cooperate on different research and different research projects. So one of the big successes we did with that was a Tuvan language project that brought in university from Irkutsk, university from the US, university from Mongolia, wow. Working together on developing a language training program for the reindeer herders up in Hovsgol region. So that was an interesting challenge of getting areas that normally don't talk to each other to come together and cooperate on a project like that. So those are some of the things that were fun. But was that getting people to share their knowledge and their information. There was, I'd sit and I'd have people come in and say, hey, I'm here to do this research and no one's ever done it before. And I'd say, great, you're the third person today I talked to who's never done this research before. So there's a lot of people doing stuff that we're just not sharing. So that was one of the big focuses, is getting that information, cross-pollinating, introducing people to each other, and getting them to cooperate. And it's a lot of what we're doing with PIN, is taking different people from different organizations, different experts, and bringing them together. Getting them to share their knowledge, share their information, share their resources, to come up with a better solution. So.
That's great. I know at the ACMS you developed some private partnerships as well with different companies and funders. Is that something you're looking to emulate as well at PIN?
Yeah, so we haven't had any public-private partnerships in the past. We are in the process of trying to develop some now. There's some tentative programs that we're currently working on.
Anything you can share at this point?
Nothing that's 100%. We've had a request for the co-op programs to get access to computers and laptops to donate some of the poor co-ops. So we've spoken to a couple donors here that have committed to getting us 20 to 50 computers that we can donate to these people to be able to do their accounting software, to manage their websites, do better social media as we go through. So these are the types of things, the baby steps we're taking as we're going through. We have other plans that we want to look at on building some kind of resilience capacity within the private sectors to support some of the social issues within Mongolia. But this is also a very new area within Mongolia of getting that corporate social responsibility and corporate commitment, philanthropy happening within Mongolia. And we're looking at playing in that field and see what we can develop. So, yeah.
That's great. So I know some of your other initiatives and kind of undertakings have involved project management. That's something you're an expert in, and something that you're the current executive director of Project Management Institute chapter for Mongolia. Is that correct?
I was right up until December.
Okay.
So when I first came to Mongolia, I was one of 5 certified project management professionals here. And got quickly involved in establishing a more permanent chapter and getting it chartered, and then became the Secretary General and Executive Director right up until last December.
Got it.
So now I'm glad to see that the organization is entirely Mongolian run. It's now a Mongolian organization.
Great.
My role is on the advisory committee in sort of providing information. Still do a lot of the trainings for them, so as we go through. But the basic focus for PMI was to improve the quality of projects, the successful delivery of projects, and it was training basically project managers in government, in private sector, in education. And a lot of that, again, that information, that knowledge of how Mongolians run projects, how Mongolians, the challenges that they encounter, the difficulties they go through, the processes we develop for them on how to train these people.
Right.
It's stuff that we've incorporated into the trainings and work that we're doing with people in need, with our partners here in the organization. So that information is transferring over as well.
So what's the history of the Project Management Institute?
So PMI started in the US. It's the largest project management certification organization in the world. It is a nonprofit as they go through. They're in pretty much every country.
Wow.
There's 260 chapters worldwide. And their main focus is exactly that. It's improve the quality of project and project delivery and improve the number of successful projects that are delivered. There's a certification process that goes through for people that are interested in that, and it's primarily advocacy for better projects.
Are there any uniquely Mongolian challenges to implementing projects that you've noticed here or that you focus on in your trainings?
Yeah, so when I was presenting on behalf of PMI, when I present at like Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and other places, we talk about managing and how do you deliver the project. And especially in more developed countries, we get very lazy on how we develop projects because we have so many resources available. So we usually do a challenge and an exercise where we have them take a project and take it and go through what you need and then cut all of your resources in half. Your budget's in half, your potential employment pool in half, your access to materials and supplies in half, and still deliver the same project. And that's very much what Mongolia is taught, is that you've got a very small population, so finding the right people at the right time is very difficult. Access to materials is difficult. Everything usually has to be brought in from outside, so you're dealing with a much more extensive supply chain issues as you're happening. And then funding and other things are also much more challenging as you go through. So Mongolia teaches you to be much more efficient as a project manager than you are from other places. So
I believe that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What do you enjoy most about living here?
And it's obviously there's some challenges. The biggest challenge obviously is in wintertime is not the weather, it's the air quality, especially living in UB. And that can be managed and dealt with. What I really enjoy and really like working with is the people. The people want to learn, the people want to make change. Sometimes they want to make change too fast and not necessarily go through all the steps and the processes that change needs. But this is what really drives, is having worked in other countries, in Asia and in other places, where the desire and the process of change is much more difficult. The example we've used is it's the opposite. In most other places, when you're trying to develop and work changes, you're beating the ox to move forward. In Mongolia, you're holding the horse back so it doesn't run wild. And it's very much that what it is. It's working with that capacity, working with the people, working with the energy. They just want to improve themselves and improve everything, which is great.
Yeah, I definitely see that as well. What are the most critical steps for Mongolia in the next 5 years to improve everything, economically, environmentally? Are there any, major recommendations in terms of policy or that from a personal perspective that
the big thing when you look at Mongolia, I think the big challenge is going to be dealing with the climate and with the environment. So you got degradation of pasture. All of this is resulting in more urban migration. Urban migration is resulting in unemployment. There's a whole bunch of social issues falling back to the changes in pasture, changes in degradation of what's happening. And there's sort of this desire to go back to that traditional lifestyle, which may or may not be doable at this point. But I think those are some of the big challenges, is dealing with that. How does Mongolia want to define themselves? There's this idea that we're nomadic, we're herders. But if you look at the population, of the 3 million people who live in Mongolia, there's only 750,000 people that are nomadic and herders. So the majority of the population is no longer nomadic and herder. But that's how they identify themselves. So how do you work with that identification, that reality? How do you look at this potential? You've got probably over 70 million animals now that could potentially be exported as a value chain market. How do you capitalize on that? How do you work with those issues? I think those are some of the big things that Mongolia needs to look at in the next 5 years, is how to work with that and how to really focus on some of those areas.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Good, thanks.
Excellent. That brings this edition of Talk With Me to an end. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. That was Mark Tasse, the Executive Director of People in Need, an international NGO here in Mongolia. We really appreciate your time. You can connect with us on Facebook. Our official Facebook page is Talk With Me Star TV Mongolia. You can also watch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, which is Star TV HD. We hope you'll tune in again next time. Baitla, baita.